Hello, welcome to Recovery Demystified, a show where we explore our relationship to substances from a radical, non-religious, and empowering lens. Our sobriety is not a purity contract. It is an invitation to become curious about ourselves and find our own unique paths to growth and healing. If you've been questioning the role of alcohol or drugs in your life and haven't found the resources that you need, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello. Welcome back to Recovery Demystified. My name's Early. I'm so happy to have y'all here today. I'm proud of everyone for surviving another week. It's a little bit rough out there, so your survival is enough and you're doing a great job. Y'all, I just got back from a couple of weeks in Peru, sitting in a hut in the jungle, staring at monkeys and whatnot, doing some more plant medicine work, and I'm super stoked to be home. I'm ready to hit the ground running and get back into it. I did a lot of visualization of things that I want in my life, and I'm ready to fucking make it happen, y'all. So stoked to have you here with me. And as always, if this podcast is helpful for you, it would help me if you would rate and review. And if you get anything out of it, maybe share it with a friend. And Recovery Demystified is a 501c3 nonprofit. We don't have any major donors or get big grants or anything. And we're entirely funded by small donations from the people that are appreciative of these services. So if you're able to give a donation in any amount, would be greatly appreciated. There is a link in the description for our donor box. And today I have another interview episode. It is with my new friend Joey. He contacted me by email about wanting to be on the podcast, and I was super stoked to be able to speak with him because we talk about something that is really important for humanity, and especially so in folks that are in recovery from addiction, which is addressing harm that we'd caused, especially doing that in a way that is outside of the carceral mindset. And I was very excited to be able to have this conversation, and it went on for a while, so we're going to split it up into two parts. But Joey's story is an important perspective because we get to see what it's like for someone who has caused harm and who has been ostracized and who wants to find a way to participate in a process of healing, and how that went for him, how the varying differences in between the experience of having a punitive accountability process and then experiencing something else later on, which is his friends being like, we love you and that's why we need you to change. And yeah, I just think that it's important to explore, just as human beings, the ways that we cause harm, the ways that compound that harm within society and our communities by virtue of things like cancel culture or replications of the punitive carceral system within our own little social microcosms, and how there's new ways that we can rebuild that actually foster an environment of healing and repair for the person that caused harm, for the person that was harmed, and for our communities in general. So thank you so fucking much, Joey, for coming on and being so candid and honest about your experience causing harm and wanting to heal from that. And I'm really excited to share this with y'all. So let's get this conversation started. Let's talk about different ways that folks who have caused harm can be held accountable, and in ways that are healing and uplifting for our communities instead of just things that tear us apart even more. So without further ado, here's my interview with Joey. Hello, Joey. How are you doing today?
I am well. I went to the gym and took the dog for a walk, and I'm in a little spaceship booth with my new friend.
Yes, a podcasting booth. I feel like some people, when they get in here, it makes them a little bit nervous. And I think that makes sense. It is quite small. But when I get in here, I feel like I'm crawling back into the safety of the womb.
Yeah, I sleep in I like a small sleeping area. So maybe I'll try to take on that interpretation.
Yeah, it's dim, it's warm. I like it.
Yeah.
Anyway, will you start by introducing yourself to the audience? Let them know your pronouns and just a little bit about yourself.
Yes, my name is Joey. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a traveling musician called Average Joey, and I'm a zine writer and poet and I'm on tour currently, on my way to New Orleans to be a snowbird there for some weeks of the winter, and then launching off from there to do a West Coast tour, which is kind of what I've been up to for, off and on for a decade, and this kind of most recent era of that has been since like the beginning of 2022, living in my van mostly and traveling around and playing music and going on tour, and then sometimes stopping in various places to work or hang out or live for, a couple months at a time.
Hell yeah. What genre of music do you make?
I am I write songs. It's sort of like the primary way that I say that. Just because genre wise, I sort of go all over the place, from sort of, folk punk, if that's not a bad word, to I put out an album last year that's a bunch of freaky piano music with cellos and electric guitars, and it's not really like that other kind of music. And then I'm also doing some cheeky country, honky-tonk, ragtime banjo type stuff. So I try to, I mostly what I am focused on as a musician and an artist in that way is the live show, and trying to be more than just another white bearded dude with a guitar that's I have feelings, and try to do, be expansive and kind of do a bunch of different things in a way that hopefully engages the audience and makes them feel like they're part of a thing and not just watching a thing happen. I've also been really into a cappella singing. That's been sort of one of my main focuses in the last couple of years is the power of group singing and getting people to all sing together. So I put out some a cappella song books and try to make that a focus of my shows, and also just hosting a cappella song circles, whether it's that can be anything from shanties to ballads to spooky dirges to whatever people want to bring to the song circle. So
very cool.
Kind of all over the place.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I super appreciate when people make an entire lifestyle out of honest art, because I feel like art is one of the things that capitalism tries to stomp out of us at an early age. Especially, I love when people make a lifestyle out of performance art, because it draws people together in a physical, literal community sense. That is one of the other things that capitalism tries to prevent us from doing at all costs. So
yes, I will say that the question of what kind of music do you play? I think one of the things that capitalism is trying to do, especially social media, is paint yourself into a corner artistically and be I've had people tell me if you're going to put out a spooky piano album, it should be under a different band name than your country folky songs, because you're going to confuse the algorithm, and your brand for this project should remain this way. And I'm trying to just subvert that as much as possible and be no, I'm going to, under the same title, make, singer-songwritery songs and freaky punk songs and everything in between. And yeah, as far as performing live, especially in this, I'm trying to kind of really intentionally make the live shows more than just, I am the person who has written the songs, you are listening to them, and then we will all go home. And trying to really drive home the point that first of all, it's a miracle that you've put your phone down and left your house and come to do a thing with other people in real life. We should all celebrate the fact that you had the will to do that. And also celebrating and trying to encourage people to continue to do things in real life, embodied with other people in a collective way. Because I think that so many of the discontents that we're experiencing in our modern age have to do with a lack of that. A punk show is a kind of church, regardless of, and I'm using that in the good way of the meaning of church, but coming together with a group of people and singing together and affirming our collective values together in a way that is process the anxiety and the grief that we're all experiencing in a way that is hopefully healthy and not spilling it onto ourselves and the people around us, I think is incredibly important. And we have to try to, curate those spaces as much as we can. I've also been trying to, in this tour in particular, I want to try to keep doing this, is whenever I play a show, open up the floor to ask the crowd if anybody is what are you up to? What are you organizing? What are you a part of or doing? Are you in a recovery group? Do you have a communal choir? Are you doing ice watch in your community? What are the various, if you're, even if it's like we do D&D every week, or we have a crocheting group where we like process grief through crochet work together, anything that you're doing in real life with other people to kind of like take a collective exhale together. I'm trying to like open up the floor to be like, tell us about that, so that maybe someone in this room who would want to be part of that can talk to you after the show or something.
Hell yeah. 3 cheers for community.
Indeed, yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for letting us know a little bit about your art and your musicianship. We're here also to talk about your story with addiction and recovery. And I'm curious what it was like for you to be a little kid, maybe some of your first exposures to alcohol and drugs, and then like when things got bad for you, and how you got into recovery. So just start wherever you'd like.
Yeah. No one in my family had any very noticeable struggles with substances or anything like that. Pretty regular, like drinking at holidays or whatever. And I feel like my introduction to alcohol, which is that's my trouble substance. Mm-hmm. I don't know when we use the word normal, but kind of a drinking at probably 17, going over to my friend's house, and we got a hold of a bottle of vodka and drinking it till I fell asleep, and then kind of wanting to be fun and cool, and that's what drinking was for. And I've always been a very social person. That was a way to kind of ramp that up, or and I've recognized now, looking back, that my desire to be liked or be social or be comes from this sense of very low self-worth and having to find those things externally and this kind of thing. But the very introduction to the booze was you're pretty typical, I'm a teenager and I'm experimenting with that stuff. Started smoking weed when I was in a senior in high school, and just kind of smoking weed before school, but it never was really too out of control, I would say. I'm
curious, when you say that you're a really social person when you were a kid, and also that in reflecting that it maybe had to do with low self-worth, was that a theme throughout your entire childhood, that yearning for connection when you look back at it?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's a pretty universal desire that we all have, and that is denied us by the conditions that we live under. I definitely wouldn't have interpreted it that way at the time. I think looking back, maybe that's the case. And also, I didn't think of it as low self-worth at the time either. And maybe that's not the full story, right? There's probably more to it than that. But I was definitely a look at me kid, if that makes sense. When I was in middle school, I was in the talent show doing stand-up comedy, and was definitely a class clown sort of type. I had my core kind of friend group of a few people that we spoke our own language and spent all our time together. But I was sort of a drifter socially in school, I'd say. I was friends with different kind of cliques or whatever.
Was your life at home with your parents, did you not get the attention that you needed from your parents, and maybe then it got turned out into your social scene as a kid?
Yeah, so I didn't know my biological father, and my mom had me really young. She had me when she was 18, so I was a kind of passed around the family kid, and I don't think it was for a lack of trying or anything like that, but my therapist would tell me you sort of were bounced around, your primary caregiver or love provider or whatever that might be, kind of bouncing around. My mom was working full time and going to school and putting herself through nursing school while working. She was working night shift as a nurse most of the time I was in school. So I was going to my grandma's or going to my uncle's or going to my aunt's while she was at work, or, sleeping a lot during the day. So there was definitely I kind of was raised by the whole family, which I think has its positive parts too. But yeah, I think there's definitely an element there where it's I'm kind of outsourcing a lot of that attention or whatever it might be.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do believe that historically for a long time humans were raised in large groups and not just in a nuclear family, and that's also
right.
A modern creation. But what I've learned from attachment theory is also that if you're not having your needs met adequately by your parents as a very young kid when your brain is developing, that those things can manifest in different ways for the rest of your life.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of Nintendo and Nickelodeon and I went outside and hung out with the neighbor kids and did that stuff too. I think I was socialized, in that kind of way before I'm 33, so it's like before the primacy of, I'm sort of on that cusp of generational, like I had like AOL Messenger. I was sort of like this, like the guinea pig internet generation of like, but also that was sprinkled in amongst like, going skateboarding and riding my bike around the neighborhood and, playing basketball and whatever it might be. So,
do you remember what it felt like to be a kid? Did it feel like this is all normal and I'm happy, or did it feel like yearning?
I had a definitely like a streak of like, how do we say? Okay, so I think there was like a big shift for me from middle school to high school, where in middle school I was definitely like the funny chubby kid, if that makes sense, kind of like that look at me kid. And between 8th and 9th grade, I kind of like started hanging out with some new people and got introduced to some like new music, and I started listening to Nine Inch Nails and like watching like Taxi Driver and like, kind of like introduced, like kind of had this like streak of like, there's like more to me than that, like I'm dark and complex, and like I wore all black to my first day in high school, you know what I mean? It was sort of like doing this like, I don't know how to say it, like when professional wrestlers are like, I'm a bad guy now, like a heel turn they call it. So I kind of, and I was into like horror movies and this kind of thing. So there was a shift there for me being like, I'm complicated and dark, and I'm complex, and I don't want to just be the funny kid anymore. But in reality, I still was that. But I think that was sort of the beginning of me sort of recognizing that there's maybe more going on under there, under the surface. Reflecting on it now, it's like, okay, that's like some of the like depression and stuff, like sort of trying to work itself out or figure itself out or express itself in these different ways. Yeah. So I mean, yeah. Go ahead. You go.
No, you go. You said when you were a kid, you just saw like sort of recreational drinking from adults, and that was like the only exposure to substances that you really had. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. There wasn't really much to like speak of as far as like being like, like, oh, this person's like really not in a good place with this thing or whatever. Yeah. And for my own experience, I just sort of like, I graduated high school. I was like drinking like, probably the amount that a 18-year-old would, and like smoking weed, not really getting into, like I took mushrooms when I was in high school, or maybe the summer after high school for the first time, and was like, oh, trees are sick. And I went to college. I had a really down point kind of the summer after graduating high school, where like I had like all these quirky plans about like, I'm gonna move to Colorado with my friend. I'm like, I had a fire under my ass. I'm 18. I'm like, I want to like do stuff and see the world and whatever. And kind of none of those things worked out. And I just was working at Sonic drive-in in the kitchen, totally fucking miserable. A bunch of my friends had like gone off to college. I was stuck in my shitty hometown. My grandmother was dying in my house from cancer, and it was just like a real low point.
Did your relationship to substances change around that time?
Not that like comes to mind. It seemed like my relationship with substances was this like pretty slow burn, which maybe we can get into, but it didn't feel like the way that I dealt with those things was like substances was my primary like crutch. I was like drinking and smoking weed because like that was what was fun, and that's what my friends were up to and whatever, like partying, but not in a way that felt necessarily like air quotes unhealthy at the time or whatever.
Yeah, it wasn't just for like emotional suppression. It was more just like, well, this is just what you do.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I eventually went to school. I went off to college in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, where like I actually found out later there was a bunch of like cool stuff going on in the music scene and all these things, but the school itself is like really isolated, like on top of a mountain, and they like kind of want to keep you there on the campus. Kind of same thing, right? I'm like, okay, I'm at college. You like party and drink at college, and I was like starting to drink more, and that was like, mostly what I did on campus was drink, and like I was smart enough to be able to, pass my classes. It's not like I was like fucking off school or whatever. I would like show up to class and do what I had to like get a passing grade, and then like party on the weekends and do that, and smoking a lot of weed for sure at the time. My relationship with weed is like, I wish I could still smoke weed. There was a period probably between like ages 18 to like 23 2, where I was like smoking weed every day. Whenever someone would like hand me a thing, I would be like, yay, I'm going to smoke weed now. And there came a certain point where I just like, I don't know, I just got the fear. I just like I wasn't good at it anymore. It took me probably a year of like still smoking weed at that rate and like being like, I'm not having a good time when I do this, to finally being like, I could just not do this. And, that's kind of where I'm now, where like, I'll like take a quarter of an edible to like go see Avatar in the theater. And that's like about my use with weed.
Yeah, very similar thing happened to me when I was 18. I smoked weed all throughout high school, like pretty much every day or whenever I could get it, in rural Wisconsin in the early 2000s, back when weed was like flat and full of seeds.
Hell
because
yeah.
It was like vacuum sealed and shipped across the border in somebody's tire or something.
Yeah, that brick weed.
Anywho, I had several bad trips on mushrooms, and then at some point after several bad trips on mushrooms, weed flipped for me, and instead of being like relaxing and like fun, I was just like filled, like ridden with fear, just fear and anxiety.
I think I had a similar experience because when I was living in Pittsburgh, this is a couple years later, but I, a bunch of my friends and I were like, we got some acid, we're going to do this acid. And like, we took the acid and like, we started feeling high like 15 minutes later, which is a great signifier that you are not actually taking acid. You're taking some kind of weird research chemical or something. And, we're all like, it was like 4 of us in my house that I was living in Pittsburgh. And we're all just like, uh-oh, that wasn't acid. And it was a strange, freaky time. And I feel like that was when I could not do weed as good anymore. I don't know if it's actually directly related, but like, I don't know. It seems like it could be.
Yeah, made some new brain chemistry fucking changes.
Yeah, some synapses that weren't supposed to connect or something.
So you're in college and the drinking you're still passing your classes, but you are like involved in that college drinking atmosphere. What happened next?
So I eventually moved to Pittsburgh and started going to school there, and I, still, drinking on the weekend. I didn't really know very many people in Pittsburgh, so I was kind of like hanging out, downtown at the college that I was at, and smoking cigarettes with the kids on the front porch and making friends with them. And at one point, my friend and I, like, these kids were like, we're gonna walk to the river if you want to come, And I'm like, all right, I don't really know these people, but I'll go. And me and my friend just like started chatting, and we're kind of decided like, we should like drop out of school and start a punk house. Now, for context, like I didn't grow up in a place that had a music scene. I loved music when I was growing up, like going to concerts and like going to my like Uncle Mike took me to Warped Tour, a bunch of times. And I was like, this is so fun. But it was sort of like this like punk world kind of in that context. But I'd never been to like a proper like DIY punk show until I moved to Pittsburgh, and I went to like a basement show that was like soaked in PBR, and it's like a bunch of sweaty 20-somethings like screaming about the government in a moldy basement, and I was like, oh, this is it for me. This is what I want. It's what I've been chasing. And so some friends and I, 3 of us, like dropped out of school and moved to another part of Pittsburgh and started hosting shows in our house. And that's when I first started playing music too. I didn't play music at all until I was about 20 years old. A friend gave me his acoustic guitar, and I also kind of discovered like folk punk at that time. Because I was always kind of like, oh, music's like a thing, and it seems fun, but I don't know how to do it. And folk punk was like, oh, you don't have to know how to do it. You just, play guitar and sing real badly about the government, and you're good. I was like, oh, great, I can do that. Because I was going to school for poetry, and I was writing a lot of poetry and short stories. But it turns out if you just like hold an acoustic guitar and yell the poetry over bar chords, it's like much easier to get people to pay attention for whatever reason. Yeah, we started hosting shows in our house. I got like really involved in the DIY scene in Pittsburgh, and eventually my band started, my punk band, and we kind of like wanted to start traveling. I got like introduced to sort of like the traveling punks like world, hosted some like traveling bands at our house that were like, yeah, you can just like travel around, and the kind of crusties that I'm referring to.
Yes.
So I kind of got exposed to that world and had, it just seemed so dreamy. Like, wow, these people just like ride around, riding trains or hitchhiking or whatever in this, group of 8 people, and they're like cooking together and playing music together and sewing their clothes with dental floss, and that just seemed so romantic and dreamy. And that was something that me and my bandmate wanted to chase. So I'm probably 21 or 2 years old. And that's kind of when the like traveling musician kind of world started. And as we both know in our subcultural context, like that is also a community that is very much involved in substances and drinking. Mm-hmm. And so, the playing music and the drinking were very much intertwined for me, like kind of for the years after that. And it's this like slow ramp. Like it took a very long time to kind of realize that this was a problem. It took many years. And I think like, I don't know exactly, like so many people have the experience of like, I went from starting to drink to hitting rock bottom like really quick. Like it took me a long time. I was, I believed myself to have a perfectly fine relationship with drinking.
The interesting thing about it too, as a punk, and being around that subculture is it's nearly ubiquitous for people to have like fucking hardcore substance use issues.
Yeah.
So kind of no matter how bad it gets, you're looking around and you're like, oh, I'm actually just normal.
Totally.
Yeah.
Like in fact, like, there becomes like this like punk credential of like, I wake up and drink Steel Reserve as soon as I wake up. And if you're not doing that, it's because you're, not punk enough or something. And I think that, to be fair, I think that is changing. At least in some of the, there's all the branches of the punk world or whatever. It depends on what kind of path you're going down. But it does appear to me, and maybe this is just because I am now sober and in the recovery world more, but it appears to me that there is more of a lot of the people who are the standard bearers of like DIY punk world are like sober, or at least like about the sobriety stuff. And so I think it's just like worth noting. But at the time, we were definitely like, travelers who were like, I interpreted music as a way to get drunk for free. Like if I just like play my banjo, people will usually buy me beer. And that was kind of that was the situation for some years. But also like the music was important. I think there's also a lot of folks in that subcultural world where like the music is always kind of secondary to the getting fucked up. And it didn't feel that way for like me and my band. Like we were a, air quotes, serious band. Like we cared about our music. We were touring a lot. We toured all over the country several times. We did a Europe tour. But that whole time we were like drinking.
Was there any point like during this phase where you were questioning it at all? Like any waking up so hungover moments where you're like, I'm never drinking again. Was there any of that?
I mean, being hungover sucks. So like when you're hungover, you definitely have those moments. But there was never, I wouldn't say there was like any serious reflection at that point. Yeah, there was many years where we were just like touring and partying because like that was the lifestyle we were living in. We were all stoked about that and it seemed fine.
Yeah, and people can get used to anything. And when you're used to being drunk or hungover, super dysregulated, low sleep all the time, it's just like it becomes normal.
That's your normal. It's like I compare it to like if I'm eating really healthy and then I eat fast food, I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, I feel so shitty. But if I'm just eating fast food all the time, I'm like, yeah, great, it's fine because my body is like used to that baseline. Yeah. But yeah, I don't think that. Yeah, nothing comes to my mind right now in this podcast booth of like, that was like a serious. We were kind of all like, or I was like personally like, I don't know, you guys. It was just kind of like we're having fun, and until that wasn't the case anymore. Like there definitely came a time when that was. I was like, oh, I need to reflect on this.
Yeah, what happened? How old were you, and where were you at in life when? Like, what was the catalyst for you to start questioning the drinking?
I was 23, and in a blackout, I sexually assaulted someone. And I didn't, experience it like I didn't realize that that's what happened until, like, a day or two later, or, like, texting with this person, be like, I don't understand what happened, and it kind of became clear. And I completely panicked, and I just so happened to, a week or so after that happened, one of the big names in the Pittsburgh music scene got called out really big on Facebook and just had to change their name and move out of town and just were absolutely blacklisted. And I am in this state of oh shit, I did a really bad thing and I don't know what to do about that, and oh shit, and just kind of freezing up. And then seeing that happen and was I sure don't want that to happen to me. I guess I'll just not talk about this to anyone and just kind of keep living my life the way I am.
Did the person that was harmed like have any like requests of you at the time, or were they just like leave me alone type shit? Or
essentially, like, our initial correspondence was just like, you should be careful when you're drinking. And it's sort of like, again, it was sort of like the slow realization over like a few days of like how actually serious it was. And we didn't really correspond like after that initial couple of days. And sometimes I would see them out in the world and would just like, oh shit, and just like leave immediately. And, you know, I went on like that, continuing to drink and telling no one about that for like, let's see, 2.5 years. And obviously that was really corrosive to my mental health and like my, like everything that was just a shoe waiting to drop over my head at all times. And I'm like continuing to like go on tour and like play locally in Pittsburgh and just like fucking push that down and just like try not to think about it. But guess what? When you do that, you're thinking about it all the time.
Yeah.
And obviously this was like a very serious problem. And continuing obviously throughout that, right, to seeing more and more people get called out online and, you know, people get canceled, you know, in our subcultural world and everything. Me Too starts happening around the time that like the shoe finally does drop. Yeah. So this like, there, you know, it's becoming very clear to me, like, you're going to have to fucking face this at some point, dude. And I just like in a very cowardly way, just like was unwilling to do that.
Did you at that time when you were suppressing all of that, did you connect your behavior with the use of alcohol during that?
I mean, not adequately, obviously, because I kept drinking, you know? Yeah. And I think that like, obviously, if I was drinking to a point of blackout to a point that I would do something like that, like clearly that's a real fucking problem. And I guess that's kind of the point, like retrospectively looking back, like, oh, this is a real addiction for you, bud. And I think that like maybe part of that has to do with that like the way that like drinking had become such an integral part of, like, it wasn't this like quick, like, you know, I'm using this substance, I have an unhealthy relationship with this substance, like bang, bang. It was like, this is just part of my world. And obviously that's how I was interpreting it at the time. But
yeah. And getting to the point of blacking out never like was a red flag for you either. You're just like, it's just what we do.
Yeah, I guess not. I mean, yeah, again, retrospectively, it's like, what the fuck are you thinking, dude? Like, clearly that's not okay.
Yeah. But also, I mean, it's...
Addiction's a hell of a drug, yeah.
Totally. And yeah, I mean, in the circles that we run in, it's kind of just like blacking out and being that fucked up is sort of normal.
Yeah, it was like getting fall down drunk, like, and like, you know, 9 out of 10 times when I would drink, it would be fine. And then 1 out of 10 times I was like blackout, fall down drunk, and drunk driving really regularly. It's a fucking miracle that I never got arrested or hurt anybody drunk driving the amount that I was doing it. And yeah, just like not recognizing that that's like not good, or I mean, probably more realistically knowing it, at least, you know, semi-consciously, and being like, well, you know.
Yeah. So when did the shoe finally drop on all of that?
Yeah, so in 2018, someone had said online somewhere, like, essentially, like, it was alluded to in a Facebook comment somewhere, like, that person makes me uncomfortable and I don't want to be around them because of this thing that happened. You know, that kind of led to some friends reaching out to me to be like, hey, I saw this. What's that about? And I was just sort of like, all right, here we go. Like, gotta rip this Band-Aid off. Also, maybe it's worth noting, just going back for a second, earlier that year, this was 2018, I had kind of, it'd been 2 years of me sort of just like every day, you know, like driving the van with a van full of my bandmates on tour, being like, you know, just all the time. I eventually sought out therapy on my own because, like, I had never even uttered the words, like, I assaulted someone to anyone, to myself, you know. And I was like, I need to get a therapist just so I can talk to someone about this.
Yeah.
And it took me 6 months of therapy to even get there. But I eventually did. And then later that year, this happened. So I eventually just had to, like, because of that, my feet were kind of put to the fire, and I had to talk to my bandmates and talk to my lovers and talk to my roommates and, like, kind of just, like, talk to a bunch of my community members about what had happened. And the opportunity for a air quotes, accountability process was presented to me. And at the time, again, in that sort of moral panic, I've done this fucked up thing. I've been not addressing it for some time. I'm really scared about what's going to happen to me. I don't want to lose, everything. Because, I don't know, I'm 25, I guess, at that point. Mm-hmm. This music and the life that I'd built around it, that was my whole world. And I was really afraid of it collapsing from under me. Again, obviously cowardly and selfish of me to think about things that way, but that's where I was at. Mm-hmm. And so an accountability process felt like a way to be okay, I did this shitty thing. What can I do about it? And how can I try to make amends in so much as possible?
What was the stipulations or the requirements of the accountability process?
You could take again, I'm going to just keep using air quotes, accountability process that I was a part of and make it the outline of how not to do an accountability process.
Yeah.
It was shame-based and punitive, and I don't want to I also don't want, I think it's important to say that there were also people involved in it that were working in good faith and that believed in me and believed in the potential of the process and transformative justice and all these things. Also, for those listening or you, anybody who has experience with accountability processes can probably tell you about one going spectacularly wrong. Mm-hmm. And it was on, mediated through a Facebook group chat rather than in person, which I think is really not the way to do it. There were some things asked of me. I was asked to stop performing for a year. I was asked to do community service or donate to charities every so often in a month. I was asked to, read various things about sexual violence and gender violence and kind of report back what I was learning on those. And I did that with, diligence. I did a lot of reading about all these things, and I'm grateful for that. So there are parts of that. And also I think stepping back from performing and trying to recognize the sort of egoic way that I was being look at me, mm-hmm. kind of thing. That was helpful. But importantly, the thing that was not addressed was my drinking. And also was eventually that process sort of devolved into one person kind of wall of text in all caps kind of screaming down anyone who had a different viewpoint of what was going on, to the point that other participants in the accountability processes were calling or messaging me to be I want to contribute to this, but I'm afraid that anything I say is going to be shouted down by this one person.
Yeah.
Again, probably not the way to do that. And so that went on for a year of me kind of going through those motions. But importantly, continuing to drink. And in the last month of that, this person who was kind of taking a lot of the air out of the room was you're never going to be accountable and you don't give a shit and I'm out. I'm not even going to do this. So now the narrative was not only that I was an abuser, but that I had, air quotes, failed my accountability process.
And what was their critique based on?
It's really hard for me to say, and I have no reason to not be honest with you at this point. Mm-hmm. I don't want to go into personally attacking this person or anything. That's not what I'm interested in doing here. But it was essentially we are not immune in radical communities from wanting to have power over people and control things. And again, kind of hopefully what I'd like to get into at some point in our conversation is this impulse towards punishment, which I won't expound upon here while we're in the middle of this part of the conversation, but I think is something that really poisons so many of these processes, is punitive methodology under the name, disguised in radical language, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I can't point to one particular thing that I didn't do this good enough. It was that in the eyes of this person, I was not good enough or something.
Yeah. Did it feel at any point like a collaborative process where you were oh, here's the places I see in myself that I need to heal, and what do y'all think about that? Or was it sort of a group of people just kind of dictated things down upon you?
I think there was an element of that, and like I said, I engaged with and did my best within the bounds of that process. And I think again there were a few other people involved in that were acting in good faith and trying to that were really helpful. It just sort of became this one person being like, what I say goes, and if anyone else has a dissenting voice, like, I have a wall of text for you kind of thing. And the result is that, again, now my public facing, like, people are like, oh, Joey, I heard he did a bad thing and then did an accountability process. Well, how'd that go? And then the storyline that's sort of out in the ether is like, oh, he failed. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think the idea of the dichotomy of accountability being like pass or fail is totally absurd. And since that happened, I have been really interested in finding more resources about accountability processes and like how they can go awry and these kinds of things, which like there's so much literature that I wish that I had access to before setting that up. And some of which just like didn't exist. Like I'm reading books that were written after that happened. Mm-hmm. But I think that we set ourselves up for failure when we have these accountability processes that are vague in their guidelines of like, what accountability means, which like I have some, notes here of like, here are some unhelpful and helpful, definitions of accountability or something, if that feels like something we want to get into. But yeah, essentially, like no one will ever have a like stamp that is like certified accountable, and I can just like wash my hands of it and everything's fine now. This thing that I did is something that I have to carry with me, and accountability is a spectrum of how your actions align with your values, and that is always fluctuating and changing. And also, I can't be accountable to people I don't actually have a relationship with. I can't be accountable to the infinite void of the internet and public
gossiping.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's not what accountability is. And even the word accountability kind of becomes one of those terms that become so co-opted and muddy and all these things that it's sort of like, it's unfortunate that it sort of becomes meaningless at a certain point, because again, one person's accountability is another person's punishment and all these things. And like, same thing kind of goes for like cancel culture, right? It's like when Tucker Carlson is talking about cancel culture, he's talking about a very different thing than you and I and our punk friends, So these things kind of become, because we are so imbued in all this like normative carceral ideology and are so resolving conflict is so complicated, and the ways that we're like trying to shoot for that and keep kind of, having a hard time with it, all these terms and definitions start to kind of muddy together. That also might be the result of me just like reading every single thing that I can about it and being like, well, this person says this and this, whatever.
Yeah. As time went on, when did you get to the point where you were like, well, maybe the alcohol has got something to do with all this?
Yeah. So I came out of that process with an even lower expectation of myself, fundamentally believing myself to be a bad person, like a piece of shit.
Did you believe that like since the assault or your whole life, or just since the accountability process? Like when did it turn to like that deep shame?
Yeah, I think that I clearly didn't, I clearly should have been doing a lot more reflecting in the time between the assault and the accountability process. And I sort of just like, I just kicked that can down the road as much as I could. And so I did do a lot of self-reflection, both in therapy and in that accountability process. And I did a lot of interpreting of like, what's going on in here, and what are my patriarchy is, and sexual violence and all these things are, my experience with how I behave are predicated on these very large structures. Now, it's important in saying that to like, that's not an obfuscation of responsibility. That's not saying like, it's all just the system and the man, and like, what am I supposed to do?
It does provide context.
Yes, and I also think I'm going to try not to fall too much down like is free will real or not, like hole or whatever, but like the things that make us who we are, our biology, our experiences with our family, our genetics, the structures under which we live and are shaped, that make us, think and behave in the ways that we do. And we might have a little bit of wiggle room as far as like what we choose and how and what we do. But that's all in pretty tight confines of all those other factors out of which we had very little control, which, my larger argument is like that makes the concept of punishment pretty absurd. So,
but it also adds to like the carceral ideology of the people that were like creating your accountability process, because that was like the only type of a justice that they'd ever been exposed to.
Right, exactly. And so within that process, I had to kill a previous version of myself in a sense. And that took a long time. I wasn't able to fully do that until I stopped drinking. But I started to unpack some of the the top movie when I was a senior in high school was Superbad, whose plot premises is trying to get a girl drunk to sleep with them. That's just like an example, right? Like to say that like so much of culture is normalizing all of this really fucked up stuff, right? I was listening to Eminem when I was 8 years old, who's like talking about raping and killing women. Like that's like one of the main themes. Now, again, obviously that does not excuse my behavior by any means, but it does like starting to unpack those things is a way to take that fundamental belief like, oh, I must be just a fundamentally bad person, and then start to provide that context to myself, right? So I started to do a little bit of that kind of in this accountability process, but nonetheless coming out of it feeling like, oh, I have failed this process. My life is going to be ruined now. My name is tarnished. And again, never was my drinking addressed. So it just so happened that as soon as that like process was over, it had been like a year or whatever, and it's like, okay, time to like start trying to like reintegrate into the world and community and these kinds of things. COVID happened. And I had gotten a job at a whiskey distillery, and then they like closed. And so like, okay, I now am isolated, as we all are during COVID. And like, I think we're just now starting to realize how broken we all are from the pandemic, like socially and mentally and spiritually. But I was in a really dark place. I was working a shitty job and drinking and more self-destructive and self-loathing than I've ever been. Like suicidal and afraid to kill myself. So just drinking myself into like not having to like go that final step or whatever. Yeah. And having those like, again, I was like, so we got, some time that's going on for about a year. It's like the bar I was working at is like reopened kind of now in 2021. And like, guess what? When you work at a whiskey distillery, it's real easy to get drunk for free all the time. And, I'm like, getting off a shift and having my shift drink and then doing a shot with all the front of house people and being like, let's go to the bar, and going to the bar and having a round of shots and another drink. And like, all of a sudden I'm like fucking wasted and driving home all drunk.
Yeah. Talk about another place besides the punk scene that being persistently fucked up is extremely normal. The service industry is right there with it.
No doubt. Yeah. People that are preparing your food are fucked up, I guarantee you.
Hey, I still work in a restaurant.
Okay, maybe not all the time, but...
Yeah, the culture is thick.
Yeah. So, my self-destructive and like feeling fundamentally unlovable and fundamentally bad and drinking about it is going on until, fall of 2021. And a few things happened in that time period. One of which is that I met my partner at the time. We're no longer together, but not to sound like cheesy or whatever, but like love is really powerful. And like having someone like feeling so fundamentally bad and unlovable and fucked up, especially when it comes to like intimacy and sexuality and these kinds of things, like feeling deep, deep shame when it comes to all of that. I just like met this person who was like willing to love me back to loving myself. And, that was a huge game changer, and someone who had a lot of compassion for me and like saw a goodness inside of me that I was totally unable or unwilling to see.
What was that person's relationship to substances at that time?
They had a really healthy relationship to substances. They're like, down to drink a little, like they were like a very soft drinker. Like if I have 2 drinks, I'm like, ooh, kind of person. And also like, we're going to like go to the woods. Let's like take some mushrooms and go camping, or like, we're going to a big dance party. Let's take some ecstasy, but like always like in a, with intentionality kind of thing. Right.
Yeah. How did it feel to have someone have that viewpoint of you? Did you feel like a resistance to it? You're like, no, I'm fucking bad. Or were you like, oh my God, maybe I'm not bad?
I was so desperate for that. You know, I was desperate for someone to be like, you are lovable. Again, it's that like, look at me, kid, like kind of showing itself again in a way. Because guess what? Like my self-loathing and my depression and being like, I'm a piece of shit. That's look at me, kid, too. You know, it's me feeling bad for myself as a way to try and like coming home to my roommates all fucked up and them knowing perfectly well my like history. And I'm like coming home blacked out. And then being like, what the fuck are you doing, dude? And then being like, I'm going to kill myself. You know, like, I'm not trying to make light of suicide, obviously. But what I'm saying is, like, that was still me being like, you know, it's the like, going into freshman in high school, like, nobody gets me, like, kind of impulse, right?
Yeah, or, like, needing outside affirmation instead of being able to provide it for yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I was just desperate for someone to be like, hey, I love you. It's okay, you know? And that really broke open some shit. That like cracked some seals for me to be like, okay, maybe there is something redemptive about me. The other thing that I started doing was taking SSRIs, because those self-destructive thoughts and like those like intrusive suicidal ideations were really present. You know, I couldn't escape them for very long. You know, I started doing a meditation practice, and I had been doing that since like COVID. And when I was like sitting to meditate, it was like all intrusive thoughts the whole time, which is like what meditation is helpful for, is like seeing that stuff and recognizing it and trying to not let it have power over you and all those things. But they were still there. And I was like, maybe time to like try to take a pill about it.
Yeah. Were you taking SSRIs and still drinking a bunch?
Here's where this really comes to a head.
Yeah.
Yes. In between, I think, October of 2021 and New Year's of 2021, I was still working at the bar, taking SSRIs, but still drinking regularly, which you can't do that because, you know, if you black out after 10 drinks on SSRIs, you're going to black out after 3.
It ain't pretty, folks.
No. So the SSRIs were helping me to kind of shake some of that shitty self-talk and those intrusive thoughts, but did not help with the not blacking out. And like, Joey, clearly, you cannot be blacking out, dude. Like, if there's one thing that you know you just can't do it, it's blacking out. And if you have, I'm talking to me from, 5 years ago, like, if you know, again, 9 times out of 10, you go to the bar, you have a couple drinks with your buds, you have a nice time, you sing a little shanty, you arm wrestle some people, and like, it's a nice time. But if even one of those times means you're blacking out, then like, you just can't do it, bud.
Yeah.
And that all came to a head on New Year's Eve of going into 2022. I was working at the bar. I was like, it's New Year's Eve. I'm going to grab a bottle of whiskey off the shelf to like celebrate. And it's like the really high proof stuff. And was like, I'm just going to like go and like, at midnight, I'll like have a drink at midnight and then I'll go home and that'll be that. And there ended up being some cocaine, and I'm obviously not drinking responsibly, being on cocaine. And again, just like blacked out again, acted a fucking fool, made people feel uncomfortable. And my friend punched me in the face.
Oh my. And
like, I don't know if he broke my nose, but he fucked it up pretty good, and I was all bloody. And I drove home, and I'm like calling my friend, at 7 in the morning, being like, I got beat up, I'm all fucked up. And that felt like the moment, right, of being like, I just can't drink. And it just happened to coincide with New Year's, right? So I'm like, okay, and talking to some friends and being like, I think I just need to not drink. And, I remember I had my buddy that I'd called that like early morning kind of call me the next day and be like, hey man, I love you. You're going to fuck your whole life up if you keep drinking. You got to not do that anymore.
Dang, you got called out.
Yeah. And I spent, a couple days being like, okay, that's really it for me. And I had a couple friends like do a little mini intervention, and I didn't know that's what I was walking into. It wasn't like a big theatrical thing, but it was like a couple friends being like, we got to talk, and sitting down with me and saying, hey, Joey, I love you so much. I want to be in your life. I want to keep having a relationship with you and a friendship with you. I'm not going to be able to do that if you keep drinking. So I want to lead with the love part, but if you want to accept that love, you're gonna have to not drink anymore.
Yeah.
And that's when I stopped drinking.
Yeah. How did it feel to hear those messages, especially the ones that are like leading with love?
This is what I'm on about now, sort of in a more highfalutin, theory or philosophical way or something, is like, What didn't work for me, if I'm going to use my I statements, is a bunch of people saying, you're a piece of shit who should feel ashamed of yourself. What did work is a bunch of people saying, I love you and I know that there is goodness in you and I know that you have so much to contribute and I want to keep loving you. But, there's a condition to that, unfortunately, and it's that you have to not drink anymore.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Recovery Demystified. If you like what you heard, share it with a friend or rate and review us so we can reach a larger audience. Recovery Demystified is produced and edited by me, Early Brunner. Stevie Petet made our logo. Our beautiful theme music is by Logan Bragg. And our social media manager is Kaylee Bausch. We are entirely supported by your generous donations as a 501c3 nonprofit. You can find a link to donate in the description. May you be happy and free, dear listener.